CE to address housing and poverty alleviation in his policy speech. High levels of harmful chemicals found in children's footwear. And day 2 of the shutdown Bangkok protests.
Hello and a very good evening. Chief Executive Leung Chun-ying will deliver his second policy address tomorrow, and he said this morning that he will report on the progress in housing, poverty alleviation and his policies for the future. Jenny Lam reports.
Seek change, maintain stability and serve the people with pragmatism. Those were Leung Chun-ying's promises to Hong Kong in his first policy address last year. 12 months later, before this morning's Executive Council meeting, he said he's aware that housing and constitutional development are the major concerns of the community. He believes policies aimed at reining in housing prices have achieved the expected results. His administration will now persuade legislators to pass the necessary legislation. The government will also aim to increase land supply as a way of resolving Hong Kong's housing woes. Finding the land and providing housing, he said, take time. Meanwhile, the government will try to reduce external demand for properties in Hong Kong and curb housing speculation in order to maintain healthy development of the local housing market. Leung is also expected to talk about poverty alleviation, care for the elderly and needy, as well as education in his policy address. On constitutional reform, the chief executive said the task force, led by Chief Secretary for Administration Carrie Lam, is willing to listen. He hopes the community will come up with ideas that comply with the basic law and the decisions of the National People's Congress Standing Committee in the remaining 3 months of the public consultation exercise. Sources say when the chief executive delivers his speech tomorrow, he will not be standing to the right of the president's seat as he did in the past. Instead, Leung Chun-ying will be in the middle of the chamber. A table is already in place. The arrangement is similar to what was in the old Legco building. The chief executive will then be closer to the lawmakers. The CE's office explained that's because the lighting is better in the middle of the room. Jenny Lam, TVB News.
Well, Chief Executive Leung Chun-ying is scheduled to deliver his policy address at the Legislative Council at 11 a.m. tomorrow, and the speech will be broadcast live on TVB Pearl.
The Consumer Council has found high levels of harmful chemicals in more than half of the children's plastic footwear samples that it collected from the market. It has urged parents to make sure their kids are wearing socks before putting on those plastic shoes. Stephanie Choi reports.
More than half of the 28 samples of casual footwear, slippers and rain boots contain phthalate plasticizers in excess of the maximum level permitted in California in the United States. And 3 of the samples contain high levels of a type of cancer-causing PAH. PAHs are easily absorbed by the skin and can cause skin irritations or even skin cancer in the long run. Although phthalates cannot be absorbed by the skin, phthalate particles may be ingested or inhaled.
Children can also ingest them indirectly because if they have touched the plastic footwear and the particles could contaminate the foot or their hands, and when they put foot or hand into their mouths, they can also absorb such chemical indirectly.
But research shows skin coated with oil-based products absorbs phthalates more easily, and so does skin with open wounds and eczema. To minimize children's exposure to phthalates, the Consumer Council says parents should make sure their kids wear socks before putting on plastic shoes. It also suggests storing plastic shoes properly to prevent phthalate particles from getting into other places around the house or into food and water. The Council has handed over details of 16 plastic shoe models to the Customs and Excise Department for follow-up action, as 8 of them are still available on the market. Stephanie Choi, TVB News.
The Consumer Council also says the number of complaints about wedding planning services in the first 11 months of last year more than doubled compared with the same year in 2012. Some of those complaints were about arguments over prices and services that weren't quite what consumers had expected. Jenny Lam reports.
A perfect wedding, the perfect banquet, and the perfect video to mark the start of a new life together. That's what many couples wish for. But in the first 11 months of last year, the Consumer Council received 25 complaints about wedding planning services. That's 1.5 times as many as a number from the same period the year before. Most of those were about cost disputes and poor services. In one case, a man spent nearly $30,000 on wedding planning. 5 days before the wedding, he told the planner that he would have extra guests and paid about $2,000 more for the food. But on the day, there wasn't enough food. He suspected the planning company was cutting corners. The toilets at the venue, for example, didn't work properly and hygienic conditions were poor. The celebrant supposedly presiding over the ceremony arrived just in time, and as a result, there were all sorts of embarrassing mistakes. The vow was not the one they had planned for. The planning company apologized afterwards. The Consumer Council says wedding planning is a relatively new service in Hong Kong, and it is best if consumers communicate with the planners well before the wedding. Details such as the names of the couple and the vow should perhaps be written down to avoid disputes later. The consumer watchdog believes the number of complaints it's received does not truly reflect the problem regarding the quality of services. It says it's possible that many couples just did not bother to complain. The Consumer Council warns that wedding planning companies that don't deliver the services as promised risk breaching the Trade Descriptions Ordinance. Jenny Lam, TVB News.
Turning overseas now, protesters trying to topple Thailand's government are moving to tighten their blockade around ministries, while major intersections in the capital Bangkok remain paralysed. As Thailand's political crisis drags on, there is a growing sense that any chance for peaceful resolution to the conflict is fading. James Aiken reports.
Amid the turmoil that grips this city of 12 million people, the mood remains remarkably calm, even festive at times. Tens of thousands of anti-government protesters have mobilized for their latest effort, dubbed Shut Down Bangkok, and there are signs it's working. Outside one government office, protesters were able to force an early end to the working day. As civil servants emerged from their offices, they were met by jubilant protesters. One of the protest groups had threatened to close down Thailand's air traffic control capability by sealing off its operations center. And a radical student organization has threatened to cut power to the Thai Stock Exchange if the Prime Minister doesn't resign by Wednesday. But the Stock Exchange says it's started to use 2 other standby locations to avoid disruptions to the financial market. The Deputy Prime Minister went on TV to offer assurances that even though some government offices had been closed, government services were operating as usual. 7 protest camps throughout the city are keeping the legions of demonstrators fed, organized, and focused on their mission. A logistical feat is helping protest leaders keep momentum and motivation on their side. The government services shutdowns are compounding the problems faced by Yingluck Shinawatra, the caretaker prime minister who dissolved parliament in December and called a snap election for February. Yingluck has invited protesters to discuss postponing the election until May. But the window for a peaceful resolution is quickly narrowing. Protest leader and former Democratic Party lawmaker Suthep Thakksuban has repeatedly said he is not interested in any election. He wants the government to be replaced by an unelected People's Council to change the electoral system with an aim to ending political corruption. Analysts say Suthep's unshakable resolve is understandable.
There's nothing to give up for now. Jail term is waiting for him. He has to win. He has to win.
A new report from the International Crisis Group says the risk of violence in the deeply polarized country is growing, making prospects for a compromise dim. Meanwhile, protesters are vowing to shut down all government offices within the next few days. James Aiken, TVB News.
A courthouse in Greater Cairo was rocked by an explosion shortly before Egyptians were due to begin voting on a draft for their country's new constitution. The bomb exploded in a neighborhood of Giza. The governor there called the blast a scare tactic, trying to keep people away from the polling booths. No casualties were reported, but debris from the blast was scattered all over the streets. In Cairo, voters were seen lining up to vote in the constitutional referendum. Today's poll represents a milestone in a military-backed roadmap put in place after Mohamed Morsi was ousted as president in a coup last July. The two-day balloting is a heavy blow to the Muslim Brotherhood's campaign for the reinstatement of Morsi. It also paves the way for a likely presidential run by the nation's top general, Abdel Fattah el-Sisi. Two veteran pilots with Southwest Airlines have been grounded after they landed their plane at the wrong airport yesterday. Southwest Flight 4013 was on its way Sunday night from Chicago's Midway Airport to Branson Airport in Missouri. Even though the flight attendant welcomed passengers to Branson Airport, the plane had in fact landed at Taney County Airport, 11 kilometers away. No one was hurt in the incident, but after the 124 passengers exited the plane, they noticed it had come dangerously close to the end of the runway, where it could have easily stumbled down a steep embankment. While an investigation is underway, a former National Transportation and Safety Board official believes pilot error is to blame. In Italy, survivors and relatives of the 32 victims of a cruise ship disaster returned to the scene of the tragedy yesterday to mark 2 years since the Costa Concordia capsized. An evening ceremony was organized to coincide with the exact time the Costa Concordia hit a reef off Giglio shore on January 13, 2012. A candlelit procession led mourners to the end of the port's pier, where the luxury liner wreck was lit up in the background. Church bells rang out and ships sounded their horns to salute the dead. The massive vessel was carrying more than 4,000 holidaymakers when the ship's captain reportedly steered off course in a stunt to bring it closer to Giglio, similar to a flyby. While the somber ceremony consoled some, the horror that many were killed still runs deep for others.
I want to have my wife back, and that's all because of Costa. I don't know what to say.
A day prior to the anniversary, relatives attended a wreath-laying ceremony in waters near the wreck of the cruise liner. In another part of Italy, lawyers and passengers of the ill-fated ship organize a sit-in at the very courtroom the trial of the ship's captain is taking place. They insist because Francesco Schettino caused the crash, his employer, Carnival Cruises, should compensate passengers.
The responsibility in this case goes directly to Carnival. They had knowledge of all the rules that they were violating.
Back on Giglio, the 114,500-ton vessel remains as a painful reminder of a tragedy that so many survivors say could have been avoided. The ship will finally be towed away in June. And still to come in our news, a mainland doctor convicted of baby trafficking. Last month's Continental Mansion fire now listed as an arson case. And new fireworks patterns this Lunar New Year.